I think we're just going to get into it. I mean, this is the first of three sessions. Myself and Alaina are going to talk through. Well, you all read the flyer, maybe, or you saw the billboard outside your house. We're going to talk through some different issues relating to AI in higher education. I think, and Alaina, stop me, please. But I think we should probably preface all this by saying we don't have an official institutional policy at this point. We have great resources from the Writing Center and the library. We have great resources that Alaina and her team have developed, but we're still operating in this area where we're just trying to sort of figure things out and examine what possibilities are. So I just want to say, if you came here looking for the answer, we don't have it, but we might be able to help articulate some better questions that can get us closer to answers. And I think that's really the thrust of what we want to talk about today. Come back on Thursday and then next Wednesday. Just this sort of exploration, assessment, with an open mind to see what's out there, how it works, what's available, and maybe to stop being scared of the whole thing too. So that's just my opening pitch. And Alaina, let me turn it over to you because I know you're going to start some of this off today.
Yes. So first, just a brief agenda for what the session is today. Is really we're going to do a very, very low surface level overview of generative AI because you can get very into the weeds on this. And you probably don't want me to get very into the weeds on this and drone on and on about like the algorithms and how the math works and things like that. Next, talking about generative AI and what that means for academic integrity, because that obviously is a big thing when we talk about this from a faculty perspective, but also from a student perspective. What are we seeing? What can we do? What are the strategies and things that you can do? And then Nate will sort of finish up with like, where do we go from here? So once we've sort of looked at all of these pieces, where do we go from here? Which then leads into our next sessions. So next slide. So generative AI and AI detection tools. We're going to talk a little bit about both because there are some interesting things with both of them. So next slide. So what is generative AI? There are lots of different generative AI tools, but what we're primarily going to be talking about are what we call large language models. So large language models basically analyze large amounts of text, looking for patterns and connections between words and phrases. There are some listed here. ChatGPT is probably the one most people are familiar with. Claude is another one. And then Gemini is actually Google's generative AI. And what they've done to create this database of tools that they're looking at for these patterns and connections between words and phrases is the internet. ChatGPT, I believe, goes up to October of 2023 in terms of the information that it's added to its database for the new GPT-4. And this is sort of different versions all the time. And so what it does, based on where it sees these patterns and connections between words and phrases, it creates an algorithm. So it creates a math equation that looks at if this prompt is entered into the system asking about this specific topic, these are the words and phrases that occur most frequently. And so it takes those and looks at the probability that those patterns will actually come into a response to answer the question that you're answering. Something I heard today is that ChatGPT is like an assistant that really wants to do what you want it to do. And so it is really trying to give you the answers that you want. And so if you have things like bias and things like that in your questions, it will give you the response that you want to hear sometimes, which means you have to definitely check it for accuracy. And that's really sort of just a basic overview of large language models. Like I could get into the nitty gritty of how they put together the math equations and all of that, but it would take a very long time to discuss. Next slide. So what we come to do is, in response to generative AI and the need to maintain academic integrity, a lot of companies began to develop AI detection tools. So there are sort of three main areas when we're talking about AI detection tools and why they are not the best resource to quote unquote confirm that a student has used generative AI in their work. Essentially what it boils down to, and I'll get into each of these points, but essentially what it boils down to is you're using a math problem, a math algorithm to find an algorithm. And so you're trying to create a math equation that will suss out the math equation that was used to create whatever it is that you created. So you're always going to be sort of, that detection tool is always going to be one step behind the technology that it's trying to detect. And so because it's always sort of one step behind, this is where we run into these problems. First of all, a lack of transparency. There is very little information from these AI detection tools that tell us how they develop their algorithm in order to detect AI. It doesn't tell us what database they use to train their algorithm on in order to detect AI. It doesn't give us sort of any of that information. And so because we don't know sort of the background of how they trained the tool in order to detect a tool that has been trained, it becomes very difficult to take those things sort of seriously. The next thing is a lack of reliability. The incident rate of false positives. Now, I know that a lot of these AI detection tools will talk about having a 99% accuracy or a 98% accuracy rate. And that's sort of based on their own testing, which may or may not, going back to this lack of transparency, which may or may have not been done with the things that they use to train the tool. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the case for everything. And there are lots of things that'll contribute to creating a false positive. False positives can be created by a student using Grammarly. Grammarly has now instituted a generative AI piece to it that gives sort of suggestions about how to change the language, rather than just sort of giving grammar mechanical issues, like taking it and saying, like, you can reorganize your paragraph by doing this and rewrite this sentence this way. And so there's more sort of generative AI that's in Grammarly, and this is now actually part and parcel with the free Grammarly that our students have access to. So that can cause an issue with them using that. If they're using generative AI as a revision tool to help them edit and revise and reorganize, they didn't necessarily use generative AI to create what they're writing. They're using it to enhance what they're writing. And so it is an interesting thing there. The other thing that AI detection tools will do, because of the way the algorithm is created, if students have given a long summary of a resource or a bunch of information without generating sort of new ideas or commenting on and engaging in that critical thinking piece, it's literally just a summary of what they read, that will trigger as being generative AI, because they're not sort of developing those critical thinking pieces. And so that may be an actual false positive. Because of those large bits of text. Also, these AI detection tools are only created to look at long form prose. So anything that is under 300 or 350 words, depending on which tool you're using, the incident rate of false positives goes up. Any sorts of bulleted lists or things like that might be put within a student's paper will be detected as generative AI and may not be. And then the final, which I think is probably for me the most compelling reason why AI detection tools are problematic, is their potential for bias. So Stanford put together a study in 2023, and it sort of hasn't gotten any better, although they are starting to train AI detection tools now on non-native English speakers, non-native English writers' work. And it would inaccurately identify this work as being AI generated. And some of that is because of, context and how and syntax that is often used by non-native English writers is very different from native English writers who may have sort of a more conversational style rather than a more formal style. And so because this can show bias, and we have this bias in these AI detection tools, like that's a big problem when we're talking about equity and we're talking about inclusive practices in the classroom, because you don't want to unfairly penalize a student for potentially using generative AI when these tools are not in and of themselves proof of that. Next slide. So we gave a lot of information that shows that we're in a lot of gray area when it comes to generative AI and academic integrity. So what do? How do we sort of navigate these really sort of nuanced discussions and gray areas around generative AI? Next slide. So I first want to talk about what can happen that's the bad. So I came across this in particular case one night while laying in bed, getting ready to go to sleep, scrolling through the TikTok. I like to say the TikTok instead of TikTok. And a student's post came up on there because I looked at some stuff on TikTok related to academic integrity and generative AI and things like this. And this student, Marley Stevens, who is a student at the University of North Georgia, was talking about her experience with a faculty member and being accused of having used generative AI. And she was going through, and this whole case started in October of 2023. It didn't resolve itself until February 2024. And it ended up making national headlines. She was in a criminal justice course. She wrote her paper. The instructor used Turnitin's AI detection tool, noted that it had been significantly generated by AI according to the tool. The student herself is like, well, I used Grammarly to help me write and revise, or help me revise my paper. I wrote the paper out. I used Grammarly in order to help me reorganize, revise, edit, do all the grammar checks and spelling checks, a tool that the University of North Georgia recommended. In fact, this instructor specifically recommended in their syllabi. So this ended up the student got a zero on the paper, ended up failing the course, also had to go before an academic integrity conduct hearing to talk about the incident and sort of what happened. The only evidence that the faculty member had was the Turnitin report. All of the references within the student's paper were legitimate. All of the in-text citations were there where they should be. The in-text citations, the information in the resources she used matched what she was using in the paper. So all of sort of those key pieces of academic integrity were there and accurate. It was just this Turnitin report that said it was generative AI. The student was placed on academic probation for a year and lost her academic scholarship because she was placed on academic probation. Because of the AI detection tool in Turnitin. This, of course, made national headlines as sort of her posts on TikTok started gaining viewership. Grammarly themselves reached out and had and provided her with a $4,000 to either use as legal fees or to help with her schooling, as well as partnering with her on appropriate ways to use Grammarly and promoting their product via TikTok. And so she's had some confidential and some informational things with Grammarly about how to use their project and what's sort of going on with this. And she is looking at a potential lawsuit against the University of North Georgia for falsely accusing her of academic integrity. And so this is, I think, a really important point when we start looking at how we're interacting with students around generative AI and knowing that these detection tools may or may not be reliable or accurate. And so we need to sort of go beyond what does that percentage say? And really thinking about what is in the best interest of our students and how we can sort of help them navigate this as we sort of navigate this as faculty and instructors. Next slide. So where do we go from here? What we recommend in the academic integrity things is what we call a back to basics approach. So what is it about the students' writing that requires feedback? What is it about the students' writing that seems off? When we think about generative AI, most often what we get are things with sort of an impersonal tone, very surface level information. It's lacking depth. It's lacking critical thinking. It's lacking some creative thinking when it comes to problem solving. And so when you sort of see that, what is the feedback that you can provide to students, or maybe make deductions within your rubric as you're sort of grading these assignments because they're not meeting that distinguished piece, because they're not going into the level of depth that they need to go. They're not exhibiting that critical thinking. So where are those places that we can provide feedback so that it becomes a case of natural consequences, since generative AI is nearly impossible to prove with any sort of certainty. So what are the things that we can prove? We can talk to students about their impersonal tone. We can talk to students about a lack of depth and understanding and exploration of the topic. Oftentimes, they will lack citations. It'll be large chunks of summarized material or things that should have in-text citations, and there are no in-text citations there. So we can make deductions there, as well as if there is a lack of citations or fabricated resources, because generative AI will make up things because it does. It wants to please you and give you the information that you need. And so if it doesn't have it, it'll make it up. And so looking at those pieces and what that sort of means and how those resources, and it does take a little bit of time, I think, to track down to see if these resources exist. But the thing I always go back to is these are things that students could have been doing before generative AI even sort of came on the scene. Putting citations in that don't actually match the information that they're using because they needed citations. Making up resources and making things look good on that reference page. And so the library is here also to help. If you need help tracking down resources, they are a great resource. Just emailing them at library@uagc.edu to look at the resources to see if they exist. And it was, and they do, as Louise said, it is really good at fabricating resources because it'll have some phrases or some parts of actual journal names, but the actual journal itself maybe doesn't exist as it's titled. Last names are really tricky with that. Using a lot of times, if you see a lot of Smiths and Johnsons and Jones and sort of those very common last names, a lot of times that's a good place to start to check to see if that Washington, to see if that actual resource exists. I had one come through our academic integrity department, and the authors were listed as Smith, AB, and Jones, CD. So it's like those are things that when you're looking at the reference page, those are things that you're sort of going to immediately be like, that doesn't seem right. So maybe I need to check these things. And so really thinking about how we can use natural concepts, since we can't sort of prove that they use generative AI, but using sort of this idea of natural consequences because they use generative AI potentially, it's not going to have the depth. It's not going to have the critical thinking. It's not going to necessarily meet all of the assignment requirements that they need. And so utilizing the rubric to really focus on that and providing students feedback about how they can improve in those areas is really sort of where we're at, I think, until, which will probably never ever happen, they come up with a detection tool that is actually reliable enough to detect AI. So, and with that, I'm going to turn things over to Nate.
Uh, Thank you, Elena. I mean, I really love that idea of natural consequences because I think we get so hung up in trying to prove that a student used generative AI in their writing. Like, and Elena makes a really good point. We can never prove it. Now, you're sitting there saying, well, yeah, I can. I know the student did it. And I don't dispute that. I know in my gut that my students are using generative AI on some of their writing as well. But proving it is something totally different. And maybe is not really the point. I like the idea of natural consequences because it emphasizes those aspects of writing, of critical thinking, of research that are really important to, well, they're important for life, but they're important for students' long-term success. And turning the focus back on those when we're grading, when we're talking about things with our students, I think that's really one way to take the conversation in a different direction, which is what I want to do now, I think, first. Because while I think all these conversations about detecting and reporting AI usage in the classroom, they're a real, it's an attack on what we do. It's a really existential crisis we're facing. And I just want to, if you don't know me, if you don't know me very well, you may not even know that I am the program chair for first year writing in our School of General Studies. So that's our comp classes. And I think as a result of that, this whole idea about generative AI that writes stuff, because of course we know that there are those that do video, that make music, that make interesting photos and art. Generative AI that writes stuff really hit me pretty hard. I mean, it's what I do. I'm a writer and a teacher of writing. And having to think about how to handle this was something that was really uh, on my mind a lot. I was seeing the beginnings of this in coursework. I had a couple of associate faculty reach out to me with examples. I had some of my full-time faculty reaching out to me with examples. It was, as we were discussing, it was sometimes pretty easy to see when a student was doing it, but it wasn't always really easy to see how to respond to it. And underneath was that sort of larger looming question. And so this kind of hit me in a way that made me have to turn that anxiety into some kind of action. I talked to a lot of people about generative AI, not just in education, not just in writing, but overall. And I know that there are a lot of people with the sort of like, let's wait and see. Let that attitude of let's just sort of let this sort itself out and we'll come in and figure it out later. I didn't feel like I had that luxury because I had students who were either using it wholesale to generate material in our comp classes, uh, and or we're not learning the skills that we need them to learn to succeed. It just felt like a moment where I needed to educate myself maybe a little bit more on this. And I became really immersed in reading about this, in writing about it, in thinking about it. Uh, and so I just wanted to give you that little bit of background, just because I think it kind of shows a little bit where I'm coming from in all of this. Uh, I I I think there are lots of really great things about generative AI, and we'll get to those in our second and in our third session. But today I want to talk a little bit more about some of how we can approach this just as well as people, as educators, but as people. Some of you may know Ethan Malik. He's a Wharton professor and one of the leading lights in talking about and researching generative AI, especially in higher education. His book, Co-Intelligence, came out a little earlier this year, and his sort of main thrust in the book is that the real cost of getting to know AI is at least 3 sleepless nights. I've had more than 3 sleepless nights thinking about this. Maybe you've had 2 or 3 or 4 or more sleepless nights thinking about it. He says, after a few hours of using these systems, there will come a moment when you realize that large language models, like Alaina was talking about, don't act the way you expect a computer to act. Instead, they really act more like a person. It dawns on you that you're interacting with something alien and that things are about to change in fundamental ways. Apply that to your courses, apply that to the outcomes you are working with your students on, apply that to, or extrapolate and apply that to different businesses. And you start to realize that, there may be some sleepless nights ahead. But I think realizing that there is a lot we don't know about this and a lot that could change as a result of this, again, motivates me just to learn more. I can't recommend Professor Malik's book enough, Co-Intelligence. It's like a New York Times bestseller. It's probably cheap everywhere you get books. So you should pick that up and read through it. He's one of those researchers who's very clear-headed and able to explain difficult concepts without over-citating himself. Citating? One of the things I found really helpful is this 11 by 11 tipping point. So this is the ways in which we start to use AI in our own lives, I think can help us to understand a little bit more about how it might be used. So experimenting is really a key. And this 11 by 11 tipping point was really a way in for me to understand and to start to see benefits from it. This is sourced from Microsoft's Work Lab, and they ran a bunch of studies and gathered a bunch of information. You can, well, you can't click that link, but we'll send you the slides afterwards. You can click the links there. Basically, what they were saying is that a time saving of just 11 minutes a day was the magic number where users started to see value from AI. So rather than putting your head in the sand, rather than waiting for it to all sort itself out, playing around with it, opening up Claude, opening up ChatGPT, and playing around with it will get you to a point where potentially you're saving a little bit of time. Now, we can talk about how you're saving time, particular ways that might help you later on. But the Work Lab report goes on to say that after 11 weeks of that is when people are seeing improvement, massive improvement in some of these 4 key areas: productivity, enjoyment of work, work-life balance, and the ability to attend fewer meetings. Hopefully that won't carry over to Thursday or next Wednesday when we have our follow-up sessions. But I think what's interesting about this, maybe the 11 by 11 tipping point doesn't really work for you. Maybe 11 minutes of savings, maybe 11 weeks of working on this. Maybe those are things that are just a little too abstract or don't make sense for the way you want to interact with this. But I do think it foregrounds the idea that experimenting with generative AI is the only way that you're going to understand not only how it works, not only why it works, but the ways in which it can be used in different circumstances. I teach first year writing. I can talk to you a little bit about what my students might be doing or what I might want to do as a teacher in those classes. But if you're teaching other classes, if you're dealing with other students, only you will be the expert that can really help understand how that's going to work. We can't really set rules because we're all going to have to be making them up sort of on the ground in the moment. We can talk a little bit about ways that we can collaborate with AI and integrate it into our courses, into our outcomes, into the way we teach, into the way we act as academics. But I think before we do that, it's important to celebrate what makes us who we are, how we are different from AI. Because I feel like one of the things that is really anxiety provoking about all this for a lot of people, it was for me, is this idea that I can be replaced, that I'm a program that can be optimized by something else, and that my intellectual contributions, let's say to a classroom, uh, are something that could be outsourced to AI. So I want to talk a little bit about, I think, what really some of the things that set us apart and that can set us apart. This goes back to what Alaina was talking about, different things we can maybe see in writing that students turn in. Um, but I think it's also something, it's probably just important for us to take stock before we get overcome by the fact that AI can do everything better than we do. Maybe we should remember to lean into those things that we can do. Uh, and I think it's worth pointing out that human curiosity and AI curiosity, if I can use air quotes, are fundamentally different things. They each have unique strengths and limitations. Human curiosity excels in making serendipitous discoveries through non-obvious connections, grasping nuances, considering multiple viewpoints, and integrating empathy. It's driven by a kind of intrinsic motivation and can lead to groundbreaking innovations without immediate practical applications, creativity, and I think innovation. Those are really important things. In contrast, the way Alaina was describing the way LLM, large language model, generative AI works is that it kind of makes a prediction. It's trying to put the next best word after the word that came previous. It's computational and it is efficient. It processes a lot of data and can reveal hidden patterns. It's good for that kind of analysis. It operates from a supposedly objective standpoint, but again, as Alaina pointed out, there are inherent biases in how it works. It is essentially methodical, indifferent, and it is outcome oriented. It is not good at reverie. So while AI's efficiency can be valuable to partner with, it's precisely why we need human curiosity more than ever. Our unique brand of curiosity brings serendipity, empathy, and open-ended creativity to the table. We can complement AI's strengths and address its limitations, but only we can do that. And I think keeping that in mind when we deal with it ourselves in our own work, I think keeping it in mind when we deal with how we communicate about this to our students is really one way to ensure that we're, again, leading the conversation in a positive way. So what does that mean for us? We're teaching online. We're uh, obsessed and deluged with numbers and data, alerts and flags. All of this serves as a little bit of a distraction from the inherently human connection that I think we got into teaching for. We didn't get into teaching because we loved Excel spreadsheets. We got into it because we love making that human connection with our students about things that are important to us. We like to model and convey that importance to others. So if teaching online is already sort of inherently dehumanizing in some ways, how can we ensure that we bring our full, energetic human selves to the classroom? So what I want to talk about is humans being human in the classroom, doing complex, emotional, and messy labor, the stuff that only we can do. My worry is, and I kind of talked about this, as we increasingly seek to define a complex concept like engagement in the online classroom, we're dehumanizing it and we dehumanize ourselves. If engagement or feedback are only a pattern of actions, where's the real connection? And if they become just a pattern of actions, well, we've created a blueprint for AI to conquer it, to take over. So I feel like we need to get better at doing the kinds of uniquely human things that only we can do in the classroom. Lean into our voice, our experience, our compassion, forge real social and emotional engagement. This is the culture of care on steroids. I'm not talking about engagement tracked through clicks, but I'm talking about engagement that blossoms in the midst of truly meaningful interactions and exchanges. There are lots of ways to do this, lots of ways to add high touch engagement and personalized feedback to our teaching. We have been studying and talking about a lot of those things over the last months. Um, but what I would challenge you to do is to perform an audit of one of your most recent courses. Locate that indelible stamp that only you can make, not just the things that you did do, but the things that only you could have done. Uh, and consider that since generative AI can generate text, anything you typed in the classroom is not a thing that only you can do unless you did it in a way that only you could have done. I think it's important to move beyond how students might be using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or any of the other ones out there and start to think about how we can use it. Can it offer support in the classroom? Yeah, sure it can. Can it grade papers? Yeah, unfortunately, the answer is yes. Can it do it better than we can? Maybe faster, but better. Um, I don't know. A lot of what AI still can't do very well centers around the human domains of offering support, encouragement, emotion. It responds, but it can't reach out. Um, of course, we use an AI system, Signals, that tells us when we could reach out, but we're the ones who do it. I looked at one of my own recent classes and I started listing things that I had done um, that I thought represented me, my own handprint, my own stamp on the class. But when I was being honest, I had to cross a lot of those things out because I thought about the way that I give feedback on a discussion board. It's unique, it's personalized, it's really great. You should log into one of my classes. I'm really good. But AI could do that. It could be programmed to be as good as me. In fact, it could read a bunch of my responses to students and it could just clone those. It could write like me. So I had to cross that off. I thought about some of the videos I had generated. Those videos could be easily created using Midjourney or other platforms that are available now. Stuff that I thought was totally mine could probably be replicated. And that's fine. I know that I did the things that I did, and I know that we're not going to be replaced by AI overlords just yet. But I still wanted to find ways to connect in the classroom with my students that would be unique to me. Um, so I started to think about everything I did, every email I sent, every action I took, every ounce of intellectual labor and elaboration that I put into my class. I started to think about whether I could do something more human rather than more, rather than better, rather than faster. I wanted to be more human in the things that I did. And so, one example of a thing that I did is that I started to record videos of myself grading my students' papers. I would uh, pull the paper up on my screen, I'd hit record, and I would talk my way through grading the paper. That way, when I completed grading and I gave the student returned their paper with my feedback, returned the rubric all filled out, robust feedback, amazing feedback. I then sent the video that said, hey, here's me grading your papers. You can kind of hear me talking through some of the issues that I saw. You can hear from me how I'm reacting to this. That seemed like a thing that I could do that was uniquely me, that was my own spin on things, that was communicating and connecting with students in a way that was not purely text-based and not something that could be easily hacked or tricked using AI. It wasn't easy. It takes a lot of time. And I'm happy to talk more about the ways in which I do that, if that's something that you're interested in or might want to take a look at for yourselves. But I think my main point here is that while students could see my face and hear my voice as I interacted with their work, they could see how I reacted to sentences. The feedback, I hope, connected with them a little differently. I got to point out mistakes. I got to point out triumphs. Got to point out opportunities to grow and improve. And I feel like that, admittedly one-sided kind of connection helped students to see a type of encouragement and engagement that was different than what I had done before, and different than what our friends Claude or ChatGPT could do. So this is just an example, right? This is not the only thing that you can do, but I think what I'm trying to get at here is when you're looking at the ways in which AI has started to infringe on traditional higher education practices, on teaching and learning, the stuff we've all cut our teeth on. I think one thing you can think about is, how do we detect it? How do we isolate it? How do we stop it? And we'll talk more about that. But I think another thing, maybe a slightly more positive way to take this, is to change the conversation around it and lean into those things that make us who we are as individual, well, as humans. I was going to say educators, but as human beings, as people, living, breathing, bloody, messy lumps that we are. Bring that to the classroom, bring that to the party. And I feel like you'll start to understand a little bit more about what separates us from AI, and we can continue to be sort of productively engaged with AI while not being so much in fear of it. In service of continuing to not be fearful, I wanted to, if I may, assign a little bit of homework. I was reading, there's an organization called Women Defining AI, which was founded by a couple of technology executives. And I'll share this in the chat if I can figure out how to do that. They wrote a post that I came across where they talked about 5 different ways you might consider using AI, just as a way to get used to it, just as a way to start to experience some of the, I don't want to say benefits, some of the outcomes of using it. And the 5 ways they talk about are using AI as a friendly colleague, simulate or practice difficult conversations with the AI. Talk about what it is you're going to want to talk with a student about, with one of your direct reports. You could use AI as a thinking partner or coach. Tell it you want to learn more about something and to ask you questions about that thing one by one. You could use AI as an editor. You could say, take my presentation transcript and tighten up the script. I've certainly done things like that. It has resulted in mixed outcomes, but it's still a good practice. You could ask AI to be a perspective taker, provide feedback from multiple perspectives, and help me find blind spots in my thinking. And you can use it as an expert data scientist. Claude recently released this thing called Artifacts, where if you turn that on, you can get it to visualize anything you want, as graphs, as dashboards, as pie charts. So if you're working on some research and you've got some provisional data and you're just kind of interested in what it might be starting to look like, that might be something that you want to try in just as a way to see what those possible perks or benefits could be. I'll grab the link to this. I'll put it in the chat. But maybe try 1 or 2 of these over the next few days. We come back on Thursday. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about what worked for you, what didn't, what might the outcomes have been. We'll send these slides along eventually as well. There's some links to some other things, and some of the references that Alaina used. But I feel like I want to drop that in the chat, but I probably also have some chat to catch up with.
I was just gonna say, as you do this homework, like, have fun with it. I've definitely played around with generative AI, and I've used it for things that are very low stakes. I'm a nerdy person, as we were talking about cat names earlier on. But I'm also part of, some online communities. And one thing that I use generative AI to help me do, I'm a sort of a big fan of professional wrestling. And we had sort of what we call an internet-based wrestling promotion, and I had to write a promo which is basically the thing that wrestlers say in the middle of the ring, talking about how they're going to beat up whoever they're going to beat up. And had to write one for the wrestler that I was representing. And so I went to generative AI and I just said, help me write a professional wrestling promo from this person's perspective. I had Seth Rollins was the person that I was representing on this other person, Johnny Gargano. Both of them are faces, which for those who aren't in the professional wrestling world, good guys. They're the good guys. And so what does that look like? And it created an entire sort of scripted promo that I was then able to refine and collaborate with and look at that, including pulling very specific like catchphrases that he uses and things like that. And so it gave me sort of a good foundation of something to play with and have sort of that creative interaction with, and looking at it as a collaborative partner. I didn't just take what it did wholesale, but I got to play around with it and rewrite some things and use my own creativity, but it gave me sort of that good sort of foundation to start with. And so having fun with generative AI, and it does have its uses in education, but when we're sort of exploring it, like look at things that you might be interested in and how it might help you, and have sort of that creative interplay and that collaboration with it. Because I think when we take sort of the high stakes of it out, it allows us to engage with it, I think, in a little bit different way that allows us to see some of those benefits, because it doesn't have as high of stakes as to what we're doing. And so we take sort of that mental potential block out because of the stakes of using it in education.
I mean, this is obviously a huge conversation, and as I preface this by saying, we don't have, all the answers. We don't even have a mandate from a bigwig to provide answers. So we're just really trying to have a conversation around this, really just trying to kind of share some of the experiences that we've had, and provide context for ways we might sort of onboard into this a little bit more deeply. It sounds like, just scrolling through the chat, we've all had a lot of experience with this in the classroom. Maybe we have mixed experience using it on our own. If this wasn't clear from when I was talking earlier, I use various AI engines every day. I never thought that I would be doing that. But as I started to use them, I found myself having that time savings. And I do it with stupid things. I the other day, I don't laugh, but I had pinto beans and I had leftover grilled corn. So I asked Claude, I was like, what can I make with this for dinner? And he gave me some great ideas, some of which weren't edible human food, but some of which were awesome, and inspired. So I feel like that's one of those situations where, if you can offload some aspect of thinking, you might be able to find some solution. I like what Dan Tiniano put in the chat. This idea that, like, if you would be ashamed of saying AI helped you to do it, then maybe don't do it. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with leaning into our own human capacity as well. One of the things we do as educators is provide feedback to our students. We can be personalized and targeted and helpful in ways that no one else can be. No one else in this room, there's 100 smart people here. None of you can give as good feedback to one of my students as I can, because I've been with them for weeks, and you guys are awesome. So certainly AI can't do that. Why would I want AI to grade my papers for me or to do my feedback for me? Those are things that I can do. And I think finding ways to do things that we do is part of our role as educators. Let's clear the space to get to those things. I think looking at how students are using it, looking at how we may be able to, on a course level, on an institutional level, deal with that. I think that's part of what we'll get into in our next couple of sessions. But I think for today, for me, one of the big takeaways I want for all of us is just, if you have not yet played around with these tools, play around with them. Just see how they work, because I do believe that is the key to understanding them and getting better with them.
And as Dana said, like it can be a great jumpstart for brainstorming. Full disclosure, as we were coming up with the names for this session, these sessions, like as we were sort of fumbling around with sort of what are we actually getting at? Like what are some snappy titles and things like that? We went to Chat GPT and said, these are the sessions, this is the overview of what the session is going to be about. Can you give me 10 titles for these sessions? And then it's a case of mixing and matching, and I like this phrase but I don't like this one, and so collaborating with it as we sort of come up with a title that's engaging. Because sometimes at the end of the day, when we've been grading all day, or we've been doing our whatever our work is all day, how do we come up with some of those kind of creative things? Sometimes your brain just isn't doing it, and so it can be a great tool to help you sort of jumpstart that creativity and help you brainstorm and come up with ideas, and then take it from there to sort of mix and match and put things together and rephrase things and work all of that out. Because sometimes your brain only has so much capacity for doing things, and you need a little help. And Chat GPT can, or Claude or Gemini or Copilot can be a help in some of those cases. It's not replacing what you do or replacing your work, but it's helping you jumpstart into getting those ideas.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate everyone taking time out to visit with us today to hear a little bit more about this. We've got two sessions coming up, Thursday and next Wednesday, same time and same link. So if you registered for this session and you got the little spit back that had the join now in it, that's the same link for the next sessions, where we will delve a little bit more into some of the ways that students are using AI in our classes, some of the ways that we might need to rethink assessment and the way we sort of power our assignments in our classes, not necessarily to exclude AI usage, but to potentially embrace it. And we'll also look a little bit more about what Alaina's been talking about, this idea of how we might use it in productive ways in our own work as academics. Spoiler, I don't think it's going to grade our papers for us, but I do think there may be ways to partner with it. And so we'll deal with that in the next couple of sessions. So I hope that you'll be able to come back and visit with us for those. I know there's a robust conversation still going on in the chat, but I believe Faculty Affairs wants their room back. So grab the leftover cookies from the back of the room, and let's let them do what they need to do to get set up for their next meeting here. But thank you again so much. And we'll see you next time.